The caller ID said it was my number, but the woman crying on the phone said she was me from next week. Sarah Mitchell had always been a rational woman. At 34, she was a successful marketing executive, lived alone in a downtown apartment that she'd decorated with clean lines and neutral colors, and prided herself on being logical, organized, and completely in control of her life. She didn't believe in ghosts, psychics, or anything that couldn't be explained by science and reason. That rationality began to crumble at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in November. The phone rang with that sharp, jarring sound that only comes in the dead of night when the world is supposed to be silent. Sarah jolted awake, her heart immediately racing with that primal fear that something terrible had happened. Late-night phone calls meant emergencies, accidents, death. She fumbled for her phone on the nightstand, squinting at the bright screen in the darkness. The caller ID made her blink in confusion. Sarah Mitchell, her own name, with her own phone number displayed below it. Her first thought was that it was some kind of technical glitch, maybe a problem with her carrier's system. She almost declined the call, but something made her hesitate. The phone kept ringing, insistent, demanding. She answered. "Hello?" The voice that came through the speaker made her blood freeze in her veins. It was her own voice, unmistakably her own voice, but wrong. Desperate, terrified, sobbing. "Sarah, thank God you answered. This is going to sound insane, but this is you. This is Sarah. I'm calling from next Tuesday, November 21st, and you have to listen to me very carefully." Sarah sat up in bed, fully awake now, her rational mind scrambling to make sense of what she was hearing. What kind of sick joke is this? It's not a joke. The other voice, her voice rose to near hysteria. "I know how this sounds, I know you don't believe me, but I need you to listen. In 3 days, you're going to get a call from Marcus Henley. Remember that name, Marcus Henley. He's going to offer you a job opportunity, and you're going to think it's the break you've been waiting for." Sarah's mouth went dry. Marcus Henley was a name she'd never heard before, but something about the way her voice spoke it filled her with inexplicable dread. "Don't take the meeting," the voice continued, growing more frantic. "Whatever you do, don't go to that building on 5th Street. Don't sign anything he puts in front of you. Don't even shake his hand. Just don't." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone in the darkness, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at the call log, and there it was, an incoming call from her own number at 3:17 a.m., lasting 2 minutes and 34 seconds. She immediately tried calling the number back, but it went straight to her own voicemail. Her own voice, calm and professional, asking callers to leave a message. But what Sarah discovered when she checked her phone records the next morning would shatter everything she thought she knew about reality. The next morning, Sarah convinced herself it had been a dream. A vivid, unsettling dream brought on by stress and too much caffeine before bed. She was working on a major campaign pitch, pulling 14-hour days, barely sleeping. Of course her subconscious would manifest anxiety in such a bizarre way. But when she checked her phone records online, the call was there. Logged officially by her carrier. An incoming call from her own number at 3:17 a.m., lasting 2 minutes and 34 seconds. She called her phone company's customer service line, waiting on hold for 23 minutes before reaching a representative named Kevin who sounded like he was barely out of high school. "Yeah, I see the call here in your records," Kevin said, his voice muffled as if he were eating something. "That's weird. The system shows it as an incoming call from your own number. I've never seen that before. Is it possible? Can someone spoof my number to call me?" "Technically, yeah, people can spoof numbers, but spoofing your own number to call yourself? That's really weird. And expensive. Why would someone do that?" Sarah didn't have an answer. She spent the day throwing herself into work, trying to forget about the call. But every time her phone buzzed with a text or email notification, her heart rate spiked. She found herself checking the time obsessively, and as evening approached, a growing sense of dread settled in her chest like a cold weight. The name Marcus Henley kept echoing in her mind. She'd Googled it obsessively but found nothing relevant. A few LinkedIn profiles of people in other states, some old newspaper mentions of people who shared the name, but nothing that seemed connected to her or her work. At 7 p.m., she was still at the office, most of her colleagues long gone. She was staring at her computer screen, pretending to review campaign materials, when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, the voice was familiar. "Ms. Mitchell? This is Marcus Henley." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone so hard her knuckles went white. "I'm sorry, who?" "Marcus Henley, from Henley Strategic Consulting. I hope I'm not calling too late. I've been following your work on the Pemberton campaign, and I'm very impressed. I'd love to discuss a potential opportunity with you." What Marcus said next would prove that her midnight caller had been telling the truth and that the nightmare was just beginning. "I know this is short notice," Marcus continued, his voice smooth and professional, "but I'm only in town until Friday. Would you be available to meet tomorrow afternoon? Say, 2 p.m.? My office is on 5th Street, 1247, 5th Street, 23rd floor." Sarah felt the room spinning around her. 5th Street. Just like the voice on the phone had warned her about. I'm not sure I'm interested," she managed to say. "Oh, but I think you will be once you hear what I have to offer. We're talking about a senior vice president position, Ms. Mitchell. A significant salary increase, stock options, and the chance to work on campaigns for some of the biggest names in politics and entertainment." It was exactly the kind of opportunity Sarah had been dreaming about for years. The kind of break that could transform her entire career, set her up for life. Under normal circumstances, she would have said yes immediately. But the memory of that terrified voice, her own voice, pleading with her not to take the meeting, made her hesitate. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Of course. But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often. I'll call you tomorrow morning to confirm." After he hung up, Sarah sat in her empty office, staring at her phone. Everything her midnight caller had predicted was coming true. Marcus Henley. The job opportunity. The building on 5th Street. Which meant the impossible was actually happening. Somehow, some version of herself from the future was trying to warn her about something terrible. But what? That night's phone call would reveal details so specific and terrifying that Sarah would have no choice but to believe. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, Sarah was ready. She'd been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for it. She answered on the first ring. "I'm here," she said. "Oh, thank God." Her voice sounded even more desperate than the night before. "You got the call from Marcus, didn't you?" "Yes." "How did you know?" "Because I lived it. I'm living it." "Sarah, listen to me carefully. I made the mistake of taking that meeting. I signed with his company, and it ruined everything. But that's not even the worst part." "What do you mean?" "The calls don't stop. They never stop. Right now, as I'm talking to you, I'm getting calls from myself from next week, warning me about something even worse that's going to happen. And she's getting calls from the week after that. It goes on and on, Sarah. We're trapped in some kind of loop, each version of us trying to warn the previous version, but we can't change anything because the calls themselves are part of what makes it happen." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "That doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. But I'll prove it to you. Tomorrow morning at 9:43 a.m., you're going to spill coffee on your white blouse. At 11:15, your boss is going to ask you to stay late to work on the Henderson account. At 1:30 p.m., you'll get a text from your sister asking if you want to have dinner this weekend." The voice paused, and Sarah could hear herself crying on the other end of the line. "And at 2 p.m., if you're stupid like I was, you'll walk into that building on 5th Street and sign a contract that will destroy your life." But the next day's events would prove that trying to change the future only made things worse. The next morning, Sarah made herself a cup of tea instead of coffee. She wore a black blouse instead of white. She avoided her boss as much as possible and ignored her phone when it buzzed with incoming texts. But at 9:43 a.m., a colleague accidentally bumped into her in the hallway, causing her to spill the tea all over her black blouse. At 11:15, her boss found her anyway and asked about the Henderson account. And at 1:30, when she finally checked her phone, there was a text from her sister about dinner plans. Everything was happening exactly as her future self had predicted, despite her attempts to change it. At 1:45 p.m., her phone rang. Marcus Henley. Ms. Mitchell, I hope you've had time to consider my offer. Shall we say 2 p.m. as planned? Sarah stared at her phone, paralyzed by indecision. Every rational part of her mind screamed that she was losing her grip on reality. The phone calls were impossible. Time travel was impossible. She was probably having some kind of breakdown. But another part of her, a growing part, believed. The predictions had been too accurate, too specific. And the terror in her own voice had been real. I can't make it today, she finally said. I understand you might be nervous about such a big change, Marcus replied, his voice taking on a slightly different tone. But sometimes in life, Ms. Mitchell, we don't get to choose our timing. Sometimes opportunities choose us. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'll see you at 2 p.m. 1247, 5th Street, 23rd floor. The elevator will be waiting. He hung up before she could respond. Sarah stared at her phone, her heart pounding. There had been something in his voice, a certainty, an inevitability that filled her with dread. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a statement of fact. What Sarah found when she tried to leave town would prove that escape was impossible. Sarah made a decision. She would get in her car and drive. Leave the city, check into a hotel somewhere far away, and wait for whatever this was to pass. She grabbed her purse and car keys and headed for the parking garage. But when she got to her car, Marcus Henley was leaning against it. He was a tall, thin man in an expensive suit, with silver hair and eyes that seemed too pale, too knowing. When he smiled, it didn't reach those eyes. Going somewhere, Ms. Mitchell? How are you here? Time is a funny thing, he said conversationally. Most people think it moves in one direction, but that's just a limitation of perception. Some of us have learned to see the bigger picture. Sarah backed away from her car. I'm not going to your meeting. Oh, but you are. You see, this isn't really a choice anymore. It stopped being a choice the moment you received that first phone call. The calls are part of the process, Ms. Mitchell. They're how we select our candidates. Candidates for what? Marcus pushed himself off her car and began walking toward her. Sarah wanted to run, but her feet seemed frozen to the concrete floor of the parking garage. For our program. You see, some people are naturally sensitive to temporal fluctuations. They can hear across time, speak across time, even influence events across time. It's a very rare gift, and we've developed ways to enhance it. But Marcus was about to reveal something that would make Sarah understand the true horror of her situation. The woman calling you, Marcus continued, the one claiming to be you from the future? She's not exactly lying, but she's not exactly telling the truth either. She's you, yes, but from a parallel timeline, one of thousands we've created through our experiments. Sarah found her voice. That's impossible. Is it? You've been receiving impossible phone calls for 2 days now. At what point do you stop saying impossible and start asking how? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a smartphone and something from a science fiction movie. The screen showed what appeared to be multiple timeline graphs, branching and intersecting like a complex web. Each time we recruit someone like you, someone with temporal sensitivity, we create a new branch. A new timeline where they made different choices. The Sarah who called you took our offer. She underwent our enhancement process. And now she's trying to warn all the other versions of herself across all the parallel timelines. Why? Because the enhancement process changes people, Ms. Mitchell. It gives them abilities they never dreamed of, but it also traps them. Once you can see across all timelines, once you can speak to all versions of yourself, you become responsible for all of them. Every choice, every mistake, every tragedy, you feel it all, across infinite realities. Sarah shook her head. This is insane. You're insane. Perhaps. But insanity is often just a label we give to understanding that exceeds our current framework. The Sarah who's been calling you isn't trying to save you, Ms. Mitchell. She's trying to save herself. She thinks if she can prevent even one version of herself from making the same mistake, it might somehow undo what happened to her. What happened next would force Sarah to confront the most terrifying possibility of all. Sarah's phone rang. Even in the parking garage, even face-to-face with Marcus, the calls were still coming. She looked at the caller ID. Her own name, her own number. Answer it, Marcus said softly. Let her tell you what she thinks she's protecting you from. With trembling hands, Sarah answered the phone. Sarah? Sarah, are you there? I'm here. Where are you? Please tell me you're not with him. Please tell me you didn't go to that building. I'm in the parking garage. He's here with me. A sound came through the phone that barely sounded human, a wail of despair and terror that made Sarah's blood run cold. No, no, no. It's too late. Once he finds you, once he's standing in front of you, there's no running. Sarah, listen to me. The enhancement he's going to offer you, it doesn't just let you see across timelines. It makes you responsible for maintaining them. Every choice you don't make in one timeline, you have to make in another. Every life you don't save in one reality, you have to live in another. I don't understand. I am living every possible version of this conversation, Sarah. Right now, I am simultaneously the version of you that runs away, the version that fights him, the version that agrees to go with him, and the version that tries to kill herself rather than face what's coming. I am experiencing all possible outcomes of this moment, and I can't stop any of them. Sarah looked at Marcus, who was listening to the conversation with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. She's right, you know, he said gently. The enhancement does come with a price. But consider the alternative: one limited life, one narrow timeline, one chance to make a difference. We're offering you the ability to help people across infinite realities. The choice Sarah made next would determine not just her fate, but the fate of every version of herself across all possible timelines. Sarah, don't listen to him, the voice on the phone pleaded. The people he says you'll help, you don't help them. You become them. Every person whose life you try to fix, you have to live their life. Every tragedy you try to prevent, you have to experience. I am living the lives of everyone I thought I could save, and I can't die because death would just split me into more timelines where I'm still alive and still suffering. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to process the impossibility of what she was hearing. How do I know this is real? How do I know I'm not just having a complete mental breakdown? Because, Marcus said, stepping closer, mental breakdowns don't show up on temporal scanning equipment. He held up his device, and Sarah could see her own biosignature on the screen, but it wasn't a single reading. It was dozens of overlapping readings, all slightly different, all representing different versions of herself across different timelines. You've been temporally active since childhood, Ms. Mitchell. Those dreams you used to have about living different lives? Those moments of déjà vu that felt too strong to be normal? You weren't imagining things. You were actually glimpsing other versions of yourself. The voice on the phone spoke again, quieter now, defeated. He's right about that part. We've always been connected to the other timelines. The difference is, before the enhancement, we could only glimpse them. After the enhancement, we're trapped in all of them simultaneously. Sarah looked at her phone, then at Marcus, then at the device showing her scattered across infinite realities. What happens if I refuse? She asked. You can't refuse, Marcus said simply. Not anymore. The moment you became aware of the other timelines, the moment you started receiving these calls, you became part of our system. Refusal would create a paradox that would collapse all timelines into one catastrophic singularity. And if I agree? the voice on the phone answered, then you become like me. Everywhere and nowhere, everyone and no one, trying desperately to save versions of yourself that don't want to be saved. But what Sarah discovered in that moment would reveal the most horrifying truth of all. As Sarah stood there, paralyzed between impossible choices, she began to notice something strange happening to her perception. The parking garage seemed to be overlaying with other images, the same parking garage, but different. In one, it was daytime. In another, it was snowing. In a third, the garage was flooded with several feet of water. She was seeing the other timelines. It's starting, Marcus said, his voice filled with something that might have been compassion. Your temporal sensitivity is increasing due to the stress. Soon you won't need the enhancement, you'll be experiencing all timelines simultaneously whether we help you or not. Sarah, the voice on the phone said urgently, there's something I never told any of the other versions. Something I learned after it was too late. The reason we can call across timelines isn't because of our sensitivity. It's because we're already dead. What? We died, Sarah. We died in the original timeline, the first timeline, years ago. All of these timelines, all of these versions of us, they're just our consciousness trying to find a reality where we survived. But we can't, because death is the one constant across all possibilities. We're calling from the space between life and death, trying to warn ourselves about a choice that's already been made. Sarah looked at Marcus, who was nodding sadly. She's partially correct, he said. The Sarah Mitchell who lived a normal life died 3 years ago in a car accident. But death isn't an ending, Ms. Mitchell. It's a branching point. Every possible version of your life that was cut short by that accident has been continuing in parallel timelines. We didn't create these realities, we discovered them. The parking garage was now a shifting kaleidoscope of overlapping realities. Sarah could see herself making different choices, living different lives, dying different deaths, all simultaneously. The final revelation would change everything Sarah thought she knew about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. The enhancement, Marcus continued, doesn't trap you in all timelines. It frees you from the illusion that you are ever only in one timeline. You've been experiencing all possible versions of your life since the moment you died. The phone calls, the warnings, the choices, they're all part of your consciousness trying to make sense of infinite existence. Sarah felt herself beginning to fragment, her awareness spreading across countless realities. In one timeline, she was running from the parking garage. In another, she was agreeing to go with Marcus. In a third, she was trying to smash the temporal device. In a fourth, she was already enhanced and calling to warn yet another version of herself. The choice isn't whether to accept the enhancement, she realized, her voice echoing strangely as it came from multiple timelines simultaneously. The choice is whether to accept that all of this is already happening. Exactly, Marcus said, and now she could see him in all timelines too, sometimes as a recruiter, sometimes as a friend, sometimes as an enemy, always as a guide helping the dead navigate infinite life. The phone was still active, and she could hear her own voice from the future, but now she understood. It wasn't her future self. It was her present self, in a different timeline where she'd made different choices but arrived at the same moment of understanding. Sarah, the voice on the phone said, and now it sounded calm, almost peaceful, do you understand now? We're all the same person, Sarah replied, her voice coming from every timeline at once. We're all having this conversation, all making this choice, all living every possible outcome simultaneously. And the enhancement? Sarah looked at Marcus, who was holding out a small device that looked like nothing more than a simple smartphone. But she could see its true nature now. It wasn't a device that would change her. It was a device that would help her remember what she already was. The enhancement doesn't give us abilities we don't have, she said, understanding flooding through her consciousness across all realities. It just helps us remember that we're already using them. She took the device, and the moment it touched her hand, everything snapped into perfect clarity. She was Sarah Mitchell, and she had died in a car accident 3 years ago. But she was also Sarah Mitchell who had lived, who had made different choices, who had encountered Marcus in a parking garage, who had received impossible phone calls from herself. She was all of them, and they were all her, and they always had been. The phone calls would continue, because they were part of the eternal conversation she was having with herself across infinite realities. Sometimes she would be the one calling to warn, sometimes the one receiving warnings, sometimes the one making choices, and always the one living with the consequences. But now, finally, she understood the most important truth of all. There is no wrong choice, she said into the phone, speaking to every version of herself across every timeline, because we make all choices. There is no version of us that isn't saved, because we are all versions of us. And there is no escape from this, because this isn't a prison, it's freedom. The voice on the phone laughed, and it was the sound of infinite Sarah Mitchell's understanding their nature for the first time. Welcome to eternity, they all said to themselves, across all timelines, in all realities, forever. And somewhere in a parking garage in downtown, Sarah Mitchell smiled as she realized that the phone calls would never stop. Because she would never stop trying to help herself understand. And that was exactly as it should be. But in infinite timelines, there is no end. Only infinite beginnings, infinite choices, and infinite conversations with yourself.